The UK CMA shares some harsh words about Microsoft. The Chinese government fires one of their officials for causing nearly $80 billion of loss for two huge gaming companies. And Sony receives a hefty fine for sabotaging third-party controllers. Here comes your gaming news for the first week of 2024. Our top story today starts with Sony PlayStation, and we get a bit of bad news after a few months of kind of continuous bad news. This starts back in late fall of this past year. Jim Ryan, the former CEO of Sony PlayStation, he actually stepped down last year, stating personal reasons. He wanted to spend more time around his home in the UK, but that still was a blow to PlayStation. Even though Jim Ryan hadn't been there for long, he had been kind of the guy who had led the PS4 and the PS5 generation to its mighty #1 place among the console wars. Following this, we also heard that there was some indecisive leadership and some hesitancy about following through on some of the plans that Jim Ryan had initiated, namely the initiative to really invest in live service titles. Following all of this, Sony was unfortunately slapped with a hefty fine from French antitrust regulators. This comes from a report from Sophie McAvoy at gamesindustry.biz. She states this: Sony has been fined 13.5 million euros by French antitrust regulator Autorité de la Concurrence, which has accused the company of abusing its dominant position in the market by restricting third-party PlayStation 4 controllers. The report continues to cite that Subsonic is a French third-party manufacturer of controllers, and they actually referred this case to the antitrust regulator. And they did in fact find that Sony was making it hard for third-party manufacturers to compete in the market, causing the fine. Following the investigation, they found that Sony had actually put in place some counterfeiting measures, which you would think would be a good thing, but what these actually did was they made it to where the third-party controllers would consistently disconnect from the console for no reason at all. In addition to this, they were also making it really hard to join their official licensing program for these third-party manufacturers, citing that the rules weren't clear enough, and even when third parties reached out to Sony, they would just not communicate at all, which again makes it hard to compete and kind of get in the game. And so because of all these issues, Sony was slapped with a big 13.5 million euro fine. And again, this equals out to about 14.7 million US dollars. And this was tagged onto all three subsidiaries of Sony's that operates in France, in addition to the parent group, Sony Group Corporation. This next story is a little more bizarre and comes with a much heftier price tag to the tune of 80 billion, yes, billion with a B, dollars. China is the largest gaming market in the world with an estimated 700 million players. And while the video game industry is rapidly growing and there's all kinds of changes being made to rules and regulations, and different countries are doing different things. Of course, we all know how that was going in the late 2010s with the whole loot box mechanic. Yeah. And so China is just kind of joining the rest of the world and kind of making sure that their rules and their regulations and their laws are up to date for modern gaming and the tactics that developers and publishers are using now. Well, just before the new year, Chinese regulators introduced several new rules that are honestly kind of in favor of the player, and maybe you could say are anti-publisher. Well, whatever they were, they caused a huge panic in their stock market, and China's two largest gaming organizations, Tencent and NetEase, together lost about $80 billion in market value right before the new year. So as you could imagine, no one was happy about this, and some reports came out right at the new year, but just a few days ago, actually Josh Yee over at Reuters had this exclusive where he actually learned that an official who was over a lot of this communication, a lot of the new rules, was fired and let go from his job. He had 5 different sources confirm that this was in fact due to the new rules that were put in place. This official's name was Feng Shixin, and he wasn't actually the guy who made the rules, but he was the guy like 3 levels above the guy who made this decision, and he was the one who was fired. And that's how serious of an issue this was. Shixin was the head of the publishing unit of the Communist Party's publicity department. And this department actually oversees the National Press and Publication Administration, which in turn regulates China's vast video game sector, cites Yi's report on Reuters.com. So announcing these new rules was such a catastrophe that the boss, who was 3 levels above the guy who kind of made these decisions and pulled the trigger, it was such a big deal that he got fired. So I know China works a little bit differently than the US and some other countries, but definitely everyone responds to money being lost, and I would hate to see what would happen in the US if that happened. Definitely somebody would be out of their job here. Again, this story is kind of bizarre, and I really want to hear what you think about it as well in the comments. Personally, I think this is great that China is kind of putting these new rules into place, or at least considering putting them into place. The rules were actually mainly geared towards making sure their players weren't spending too much time or too much money in games. Now you think, okay, those are good speed bumps to put in place. Those are good caution signs to have. But from the publisher standpoint and from kind of the corporation standpoint, they're saying like, hey, that's putting up obstacles in our way of cash flow, in our way of getting these players in our game, in the way of keeping them in our game, and in a way of keeping their wallets active in our game, which we think as individuals like, well, suck it up, you don't get all my money. But anyway, this was such a big deal. It was such a big barrier that they were putting in place. The stock market thought, or investors thought, that it caused that much panic and that much turmoil in the stock market, losing 80 billion in market value. So what do you think? Do you think that, hey, the government should stay out of this? And again, I know China's different, but as far as the US and other countries, do you think your government should stay out of it and just kind of let you make your own decisions, and you're a big boy, you're a big girl, you can do what you want? Or do you think there needs to be some sort of rules and regulations in place to protect people who maybe don't understand that they're being coerced or they're being influenced in a way in which maybe they don't understand, and they're going to spend more money than they want, or they're going to spend more time in a game than they want, so they want that protection from the government? What do you think? Finally, Microsoft President Brad Smith, who was pivotal in pushing the Activision merger through recently in 2023, he was noted as having some kind words for the UK's Competition and Markets Authority, or CMA. The CMA made headlines last year for being fairly antagonistic towards Microsoft in the Activision merger. There was a little bit of bad blood, it seems like, from the CMA and Microsoft. I think Brad had initially made some comments last April as they were going through it, that the CMA, he was kind of concerned that UK wasn't going to be a good space for Microsoft to do business, and they were being kind of anti-business and anti-consumer because of all these rules and regulations they were wanting to kind of put on Microsoft through this merger. And the CMA, in turn, also had some salty words for Brad Smith and for Microsoft as a whole. In her official summary statement found on the gov.uk website, Sarah Cardell, the chief executive of the CMA, warned other businesses that, quote, the tactics employed by Microsoft are no way to engage with the CMA, indicating that she was still a bit salty about this whole process. Well, even though she was maybe still a little salty for giving that comment, recently in a podcast that Brad Smith was on with Dame Emma Walmsley at the BBC, Smith was asked how he feels about Great Britain now and how it is for Microsoft to do business there, and kind of what he thinks of it as a whole, given all the turmoil and the tussle with the CMA. And Smith admitted that he had learned a lot from the last year and that he was growing, and he feels good about moving forward and thinks that everyone should feel good about moving forward, looking back on the process. But he also said that the CMA was tough but fair. And so maybe a little bit of hindsight, maybe a little bit of time away from kind of being in the weeds, he's come to appreciate or come to respect the rules and the regulations that the CMA was trying to impose on them to try to make it a better deal for everybody. After that, Smith continues to give a great interview about their future, about Microsoft's future plans in the UK. Specifically, he talks about an AI initiative that they're going to invest a lot of money in the UK's AI infrastructure. And so that's really interesting. If you want to listen to that podcast, it is linked in the description. Start at about 18 minutes and 30 seconds. Before you go, I just want to say I hope you are well. I hope you're taking care of yourself. And if you're not, it's okay to not be okay. I know I've recently gone through some stuff and I had to reach out for help, and I want to make sure you do too. And so I'm going to include a few starting points for you in the description if you need to reach out for help. It usually just starts with a phone call, but there will be a few starting options for you down there if you need those. For everyone, thank you so much for watching. Thanks for trying this new thing on with me. This is new, so let me know in the comments if you have any feedback. Do you like the format? Do you like the tempo? Do you like the content? Do you like the delivery style? Any feedback at all you want to give, let me know. I want to kind of try this new style on for a bit and this new kind of direction in content creation. Don't worry, I'm still going to be making lots of Starfield content. Just wanted to try this out at the very beginning of the year. Happy New Year to you. That's your news for the first week in 2024. I'll see you in the next video.